Good morning, Southside Bible Church. It is good to be with you here from the Pastor's Corner. I hope you are all doing well and living in the grace of Christ. I've entitled this message, Pressed and Compelled to Bear the Cross of Christ. I love biblical drama, and this is such biblical drama. It's wide. I spent a good part of Saturday between Good Friday and Resurrection Sunday meditating and thinking about this man called Simon of Cyrene. He comes out of nowhere onto the scene of the most historical, redemptive hour, and who is pressed into carrying the cross of Christ. What's interesting about this man is he is mentioned in all three of the Gospels, of the Synoptic Gospels. Let me read these three accounts for us, and we'll go from there. Here's Matthew's account in Matthew 27:32. It says, as they were coming out, they found a man of Cyrene named Simon, whom they pressed into service to bear his cross. Luke 23:26 says this, when they had led him out, or led him away, they seized a man of Cyrene coming from the country and placed on him the cross to carry behind Jesus. And then Mark, which has more detail in it, Mark 15 verse 20 and 21 says, they led him out to crucify him, and they pressed into service a passer-by coming from the country, Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to bear his cross. So you have a man named Simon of Cyrene, possibly a Jew, possibly a Gentile. Both Jews and Gentiles did claim the name Simon. He's from Cyrene, which is modern-day Libya, North Africa. That would be one country just west of Egypt. He's on his way. He's in Jerusalem, perhaps the Passover, celebrating, doing business. We have no idea. We know he's coming in. Mark adds this detail. He's coming in from the country. He sees Jerusalem up in commotion. The crowd are along the Via Dolorosa, and the path, which is the path of suffering or the path of trials. There's Christ as a criminal, condemned as a criminal, carrying his cross. Some are crying out, and some are mocking. And as Christ seems to almost collapse under the cross, due most likely to just sheer physical exhaustion, lack of sleep, dehydration, trials all night long, sent to Pilate during the day to be tried, to be mocked, to be beaten, and now the crossbeam is set on his back, and he's making his way up the hill to Calvary, and he's about to collapse, and the soldiers are under the strict order to make sure Christ gets on the cross. Christ gets on the cross. And so this man is either standing in the crowd, looking at the whole thing, or just as one of the Gospels indicates, is he's walking by, and the soldiers compelled or pressed on him. Literally, the word is a legal word. They requisitioned him. Can't say the word. They ordered him. It was a legal order to carry the crossbeam of the cross. Luke says they laid the beam on him, and he carried it up the rest of the way as he walked behind Christ. That is all we have of this man. That is all the biblical record and account has. He's never mentioned again. So if you could imagine for a moment from Simon's standpoint, I'm sure he didn't wake up in the morning thinking to himself, I think I'd like to carry a cross of a criminal. I'm sure he did not think that. That would have been the most heinous, humiliating thing he can go through in Jerusalem, a place like a big city of Jerusalem. What did he make of it? I wonder that night when he went home, what did he tell his family as he washed the blood or the sweat from the cross off his neck and off his shoulders? Did it impact his life in any way? Whatever happened to Simon? he's never mentioned again. He comes on the scene in one of the most dramatic, redemptive moments, and he's gone. He's gone. Well, there might be more to the story than we see here. Mark makes this observation or writes this record down. Look with me again to Mark 15, 20, and 21. There's this insightful detail of Mark being close to the disciples, and particularly to Peter, says this, and they pressed into service a passerby coming from the country. How did Mark know that? How did he know Simon of Cyrene was in the country coming in? And the other thing he adds to the detail, and he says, and he's the father of Alexander and Rufus. And he basically came to bear the cross of Christ. Mark is writing to the Gentile in Rome, and about 20 some years later. And so he mentions Simon's sons' names. Why would he do that? That is an unusual piece of information. Not only that, I mean, it would be very odd for Mark to put that in unless he expected the readers to understand, to make the context and the connection between Rufus, Alexander, the Roman church, and Simon of Cyrene. Was there a context? Was there a connection there? I believe so. I believe so. The Bible, most Bible versions, on their cross-reference, they mention or they put down Romans 16:13. This is this passage for a reason they do that, and here's the reason. We find Paul making reference about a man who had become a leader in Rome. In writing in Romans 16:13, his letter in his final greeting to the Romans, he says, greet, literally embrace or kiss, Rufus, a choice or a chosen man in the Lord, also his mother and mine. Rufus, which means red. This is probably the same Rufus as the son of Simon of Cyrene. There's no verse in the Bible that tells us this is the person, but pretty much all commentators, historians, church fathers that I've read on this particular subject link Rufus of Romans 16 with the same Rufus in the Gospel of Mark, link being the son of Simon of Cyrene. Not only that, it's interesting that Paul references Rufus, Mark references Rufus. They're both referencing them to the church in Rome, to the Gentile church. Again, most scholars believe Simon of Cyrene had become a believer and he led his family to the Lord. So we have one of Simon's sons mentioned half a generation later went on to become a leader in the Church of Rome. I wonder what, I'm sure the Church of Rome would talk to a man whose father who carried the cross of Christ, who you would have an eyewitness to all these things. I wonder how many times the church at Rome, as a new guest would come in, a visitor would say, hey, you got to meet Rufus. You know who Rufus is? Rufus is dad who carried the cross of the Savior that you read in the accounts. So Paul makes another reference to Rufus, and in this particular case to his mother. He says, greet Rufus for me, and Rufus's mom, who would have been Simon's wife, if that's the case. And he says, his mother and mine, and makes this figurative reference as being his mother. I'm sure she was older than him. She must have been a believer who ministered to him. Sometime this family might have moved to Antioch, and because there's quite a bit of people, first missionaries came out of Cyprus and Cyrene, modern day Libya, moved to Antioch and started the churches there, evangelizing the Gentile folks there. And so sometime back, Paul, when he came into Antioch and started his ministry, his mother might have taken him in. This family might have taken him in. This woman in a very simple way, impacted the apostle's life? Was it her home? Was it her kitchen? Was it her meals? Was it her encouragement, her motherly care to the single apostle? I love these saints who come on the scene. They don't make this big splash, but minister behind the scene through kitchens, through home, through meals, through their encouragement, and impact a life of an apostle. And they get a four-word biography out of the Apostle Paul, his mother and mine. Such tender comments received by Paul of Rufus and his mother. I love how Christ binds our hearts, the hearts of the believers, so tenderly close together. You have a family from North Africa loving on an apostle who would have been from modern-day Turkey, somewhere perhaps in Antioch or somewhere in North Europe area. So did Simon of Cyrene become a believer? We don't have any indication, but everything about biblical historical background, commentaries, church history, and all that, they all give a resounding yes. So here's some personal application for us. I love the amazing work of God. Simon would have been the first North African or African missionary, convert and missionary, him and his family, to the Church of Jesus Christ. The gospel is unbound by borders or people, and it goes far beyond. And when it goes far beyond, it binds the hearts of God's people together in a very, very beautiful way. Second thing, back to Simon of Cyrene. I wonder, when he's sitting there in church, most amazing testimony, someone would walk up to him one day and say, Simon, how did you come to know Jesus Christ? Can you give me your testimony? What kind of testimony would he have? What would he say? I carried his cross. I had his blood and his sweat on my neck. But, as Paul says, we no longer know Christ according to the flesh. But now Simon sees Christ seated at the right hand of God. If the church record indicate this same Simon, this same family, serving the Lord in Rome. Another application, I love the account that the picture here, that they pressed and placed on him the cross to be carried, the cross to bear, to follow in the footsteps of Christ. This scene is a historical moment, but it is a very graphic, symbolic, vivid moment, a picture for us that at any time the cross may be laid on our back, on our shoulder. I have a cross responsible to bear and to carry. Christ carried his, and we have a cross to carry. We don't know where it'll come from, but it'll come. Peter says in 1 Peter 2:21, he says, since Christ also suffered, leaving you an example for you to follow in his steps, and then Christ went on, kept entrusting himself to him who judges righteously. So while Simon was being compelled by the soldiers to bear the cross of Christ, Paul says this. He says, 2 Corinthians 5, for the love of Christ compels us. Literally, the Greek word, the love of Christ, lays hold of us. And having concluded this, that one died for all, so that they all who might live no longer live for themselves, but for him who died and rose again on their behalf. So when trials and tribulations and difficulties are laid on us, they're laid on us. May they come. May the love of Christ compels us, gets hold of us, that we embrace the cross that God puts in our life. I pray that Christ lays hold of us in a very, very tender, loving, gentle way, that we could take on the cross that this life gives us. Two more things. Running out of time. I love the heart of Christ in all this. I've never seen this before, but at every station of the cross, life was given out. At the grace of God met Simon on the road to the cross. The grace of God met the thief next to Christ. And the grace of God met the centurion in front of the cross as the world shook beneath him. At every station of the cross, Christ was gathering brothers and sisters to himself. A testimony to the very love and tender affections of Christ's heart. Fifth and final application. If all this is true, and I assume and I trust it is, how many times did we read about the life of Simon the Cyrene and we passed over the name Rufus? There is so much gold nuggets to mine out and to tease out and to flesh out in scriptures as we make cross-references and studies, not just for our head, but also for our heart. That we not only feed our heads and our mind with knowledge, but inflame our hearts with the affection and with the love of Christ. And again, you get a testimony. The shortest, most profound, sweetest biography are in one verse or one sentence or 4 words, his mother and mine. Christ is risen, and he is risen indeed. So in the midst of this pandemic that's engulfing all over us, here's my challenge for us today. Live a resurrected life. Live, if you've died with Christ, you've been raised with him, live a resurrected life for your family, for your friends, for your spouse, for your children, for those at work. Live a resurrected life. We love you, and we are here continually praying for you guys. Lord bless you, and may God's grace abound more and more to all of us. Amen.